It is Friday, February 7th. This is Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News for another edition of Take 2. Joining us is Dave Alvord, former Salt Lake County Councilman and South Jordan Mayor. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you.
And as always, Maura, I was going to call you Maura Exoro. Ooh, that sounds very dangerous. Maura Carabello of the Exoro group. I imagined you with a sword when I said it, so
it
there we go.
Sound like that, or a natural gas company.
I've got Friday brain. I went to the gym this morning after I had some blood taken, and I don't know if I'm just Friday or I was woozy, but I put in a code to my locker and I thought it was the same code and I couldn't figure it out. So after like half an hour, I had to go plead with somebody to come unlock me and get me out of it. I was it's going to be one of those days. So hopefully my brain will cooperate. There's a lot to talk about. Donald Trump's shock and awe campaign continues in our nation's capital. And we have a ton of great bills to get to in the Utah legislative session. Maura just brought up human composting. We're going to talk about that. Fluoride, medical malpractice, jail, no release bill, all kinds of good stuff, and maybe daylight savings. So we've got a lot to get to. I wanted to go over the national headlines real quick while we're here. First up, I wanted to talk about USAID because it's getting a ton of attention and traction. If you're online right now and following on X or wherever you get your social media news, and there's people listing off where all the money's going, and some of it's like, okay, well, that seems reasonable, and some of it seems insane, where we're giving $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia workplaces, DEI musicals, transgender operas, that's in Colombia. So there's a lot of things that I'm thinking, if taxpayers had a choice and you were telling them this is how you're spending their money, would they be doing it? And I guess that brings us to the question of, is USAID doing good work? Do either of you have strong feelings about this, and have you been following along?
This is probably the only federal thing I am a little sassy on. So
you're loving all this?
I'm not going to go too far afield, but I remember in the early 90s, I was living in Uganda doing community development work, and I was sent to this small village called Rakai. It was right on the Tanzanian border. If you'll remember, if you need a cue, this is when Magic Johnson told us he had AIDS. But Uganda was the global center, the pandemic center of AIDS, and Rakai was the ignition point there. So I go into this community, I don't know what I thought I'd expect, but the decimation showed up through the fact that there was nobody there. There were no men of an adult age because they had all died. In Uganda at the time, they called it SLIM because AIDS was decimating. Who was rebuilding that nation? In part was USAID and WHO, and who? And that is all to say, the Republicans are putting around this list of absolutely largely critiquable lists of things that are making bad choices. But what USAID does, remember, it was two things to it. One, Kennedy put it in the 60s. When Kennedy put it in, it was part of the Department of State. Later, Congress moved it out of the Department of State to an independent agency.
Was that a bad idea?
Which is why there is a question about whether Trump has the executive power to mess with it or not. So just know that move that Congress made, the question is, yes, he put an executive order, but does the order need to be approved by Congress? So that's just a part of the story. But the other one is this notion of quiet power. And the United States of America has used quiet power better than any other nation to date. And make no mistake, China is leaning into quiet power right now. They're buying tons of infrastructure and clean water and clean roads and safe places throughout developing countries, because quiet power allows you to win hearts and minds. It allows you to seed democracy. It allows you to seed a republic. It allows you to seed a movement that will challenge a dictatorial environment. Quiet power comes by coming into cities and states and nations and being able to build out a quality of life. And USAID has delivered most of our quiet power throughout the generations. And this administration does not understand that concept, does not bode well for us. Is the list stupid that's been kicked around? Yes, but I'll also remind you that the great state of Utah gave $2 million to some horse urine thing during COVID because a buddy of a buddy of a buddy said it was a good idea. And what did we do with those? We disposed of them.
That is just to say, dumb.
Sometimes the government's dumb. The notion that we should cut our budgets absolutely makes sense to most people. So I am not against the budget cutting. This is not cutting a budget. This is anarchy. And to not understand the power that is America participating in these developing countries is to just say, and even furthermore, the fact that they're using this cultural banter to be the genesis of why USAID doesn't work, it just speaks to an administration that doesn't understand foreign affairs. So I'm a little worked up. I'm not worked up about like looking at a stupid list and cutting from a stupid list, but I'll also remind you that in that stupid list, USAID's budget, $50 billion. So when someone is quacking about 1.5 million on an expense line, it should be cut. But their budget is $50 billion. The other interesting fact about USAID is $50 billion a lot in today's federal government? It sure is not. So he's taking a small agency.
It's a little less than 1% of the budget, I believe.
But I'm just saying, when somebody is complaining to you about a $5 million quirky quirk, one, probably they should cut it. Two, know how big things are before you decide that we're wasting a lot of money. It's a $50 billion budget. That list that the Republicans are passing around is inconsequential, but more important for me is it lacks a firm understanding of how to use quiet power. And that has been the key to our Democratic and Republican success nationally. So yeah, I think it's dumb. I think I just want people with scalpels. I don't want people with hatchets, and he only carries a hatchet.
And
President Trump.
And speaking of hatchets, so right now I think currently USAID has 10,000 employees. It would be cut to 300 with what we're hearing. None of that's hard and fast numbers, and they would keep people who are dealing with more of the health and humanitarian that you were talking to up front. When you see some of these lists coming out, and obviously you're seeing kind of the wild things that are coming on social media, do you like the hatchet idea, or do you want a scalpel more like Maura is saying?
I don't like spending that hasn't gone through all the houses of Congress and made it to the president's desk for signature. And my understanding is through these executive orders, what can be built up can be taken down just as easily. And so those things could be removed. And I agree with the scalpel idea. Perhaps they need to be a little more methodical in going through these things. However, I must say, she talked about quiet power. I would say we're quietly losing our power when we're inflating our dollar to the point we are. And it would be very terrible if we didn't find some substantial cuts, not just the little $1 million tinkers, but some substantial cuts to keep America strong in the world economy.
I know a lot of people are worried because it seems like Elon Musk is heading up Doge, as we're calling it. And he's obviously been tasked by the president, so he has, I don't know if you can call it a job because he's probably not getting a paycheck, but he's been tasked with this work. A lot of people are worried about a billionaire getting access to your social security numbers or going through. When I think about how many people have my social security numbers and who's working at the local IRS office or whatnot, I'm not concerned about that. Are either of you concerned that Elon Musk is the chief captain of cutting right now?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's an unelected official who has no prior experience. And he got there through political tradesmanship and merit. Now, there's always been a relationship with private sector and capital and power, so that's not unusual. But to formalize this power with someone who has very little experience in it, what I will say, though, is if I'm looking at about who's been the offender, in the long history of time, it's probably been more the Democrats that have had unusual relationships going forward, and it's been the Republicans who have pounded on the notion that you should be elected in order to have the public trust. So I find it intriguing that the Republicans seem to be a little inebriated by this rich guy, because that seems to be his primary credential, is that he's rich. I mean, dude's smoking most of the time, and you could question his success. And the one thing I don't believe is that I don't believe government runs like a business. I think there are key business practices that government could use. But when people say to me, we got to run this like a business, I'm like, then you don't understand the fundamental difference between public service and for-profit. Again, principles being applied is different. So I look at his business record, and if you say to me, well, he's worth $1 billion, making money is not making smart, responsible statesman-like public choices. We should all be concerned by this.
Do you have the same concern, or no?
I don't see anything what Elon Musk is doing is different than any other advisor to the president. What we're really talking about is the power of the presidency. And if Donald Trump doesn't want Elon Musk doing a certain thing, he will rein him back. I will say Elon has spent his career as an engineer in finding efficiencies. You think about rocket science itself, that's the whole idea of a rocket, is to bring payload to space for the cheapest amount of money possible. And so his brain is very focused on efficiencies. He's done that with Tesla as well. And so it is a little bit of a lateral play to suddenly be getting into federal budgets, but he is wired to be looking for efficiencies. So I appreciate the effort that he's doing, and if he goes too far, he can be reined back.
Nobody wants his debt structure on X. Nobody wants his debt structure on Tesla. No, I mean, he's a hype machine. Nobody wants his P&L on any of his places. Nobody wants that. I want Warren Buffett's sheets. I don't want Elon's sheets. Elon is the master at, he's an incredible idea guy. And I'm not minimizing how bright he is, but nobody wants the sheets on his. Everybody wants someone like Warren Buffett's sheets in terms of like, if you're gonna leave me your portfolio.
Yeah.
I mean, he's wrecking a lot of these companies from a P&L perspective.
The one thing that I think is interesting with what's happening here is we know that Elon Musk is doing it. The president said he was tasking to it. So we do have a billionaire, which is a weird position to be doing some of this that has all these other companies. I wonder how he has time. But at the same time, too, I think when you look at the Gates, the Soros, the Oprahs of the world, I think they have a lot of that quiet power we were talking about and influence, and you don't always know where they're at. So at least Elon, he's telling us and tweeting about it or Xing wherever he's up to or what he's doing. Sure. So that part's interesting. And if you're ever interested in USAID and the concept of that quiet power, have either of you watched Madam Secretary? It's one of my favorite shows. It's old from years ago. It's a super interesting show. Madam Secretary is Secretary of State, and it kind of shows behind the scenes all the time of how the government works with some of those things that you don't think about, trying to figure out ways to, kind of bridge gaps and make deals or whatever. So kind of an interesting way to look at it if you haven't before. Before we move on, I want to talk about President Trump floating an interesting idea, bad idea, great idea, to rebuild Gaza Strip. I feel like he's the captain of floating ideas before he's really thought them out. A lot of people have been upset. Impeachment articles have already been filed. I think every president in the United States at some point has had an impeachment article filed against him, but he's only 3 weeks in. Was this dumb of him to say something like this, or is there merit to his wild ideas when he throws them out there?
I don't think it was dumb of him. I think he's trying to look outside the box, especially in regard to the Gaza Strip. That's been an issue, a problem in the world for, 60, 70 years. And so we've tried the same things, gotten the same results. For him to propose a new idea, in true Trumpian style with boldness, I think is an interesting way to look at the problem. And the impeachment articles, very predictable, a little sooner than I would have expected, but I suspect will have no consequence.
Words I never thought I'd say is, I believe who's explained this to me is Steve Bannon.
Okay.
Wow. I think this is part of a strategy. I don't think it's serious. I think it's, Steve Bannon has spent a lot of times. I find it just fascinating to watch him be a little bit of a critic to Trump right now, and certainly a critic to Elon Musk. But, I think it is part of breeding chaos. I think it is telling that we're not this week just trying to keep up with all of the other nations and peoples that we're taking over. We haven't paid as much attention to what were some pretty out there cabinet choices. And I will say, I think it's the president's prerogative on their cabinet, but there were some that probably were going to cause a ruckus. I think this is part of a calculated chaos strategy. It's not serious-minded. It is also the biggest ugly American move ever. It's so embarrassing how little he flags about understanding international politics when he says things like this. It's just like, oh man, this is exactly what people think of Americans. We think we don't understand anything, and he's proving it.
So we go back to the old way where they rebuild and then they use it as a staging site to lob missiles at Israel. It's
not bilateral that way. It's not either I turn it into a luxury resort or there's not a two-state solution. That really, really denigrates the brilliant minds who have been trying to resolve this issue. This area of the world is as complex as it can be. And it's not because they don't understand things and the Americans got it. And to assert that you want to make it into a resort is so demeaning and disrespectful to all parties that I have to believe it's part of a strategy, because I actually don't think Donald Trump has that lack of wherewithal. And it's so big American of us. And I just think, I'm going to say look at our flank. Unless Donald Trump gets a little more sophisticated about his strategy, I think China's got a leg up.
Speaking of his strategy, back here at home, when he was running, he talked a lot about banning trans athletes from women's and girls' sports. He made that happen with an executive order. So I guess it's a change that's in place for 4 years. I was waiting to see what the NCAA would do about it, because obviously there's been some back and forth on that here in Utah. Southern Utah University and Utah State University women's volleyball players forfeited some matches, even filed a lawsuit against the Mountain West because of a trans player from San Jose State. The NCAA came out yesterday and said they'll comply. There won't be any trans athletes in women's sports in college. Maura, you've never been a fan of this issue because there's so few women that we're talking about here. Was this a moment, though, when you see President Trump surrounded by all these little girls and athletes, that you think it was a win for him, or do you feel like this was a loss?
You know, the head of the NCAA is a former Republican governor. He's a smart man. He was smart to say, hey, listen, we're going to accept this ruling again. There are over 500,000 college athletes. There are less than 10 trans athletes. So, you know, I mean, I think it's moving forward. I think it's become a cultural guidepost for Republicans. I will be happy to see them move on to other things. So I think that this provides, like you said, 4 years of clarity on it.
And you sat on the county council that I know dealt with some of these issues when they were going on. Is this something that average everyday Utahns care about, or are there just a few that are really into this issue?
No, absolutely. I have a lot of friends whose daughters are involved in Title IX sports. They're very concerned about it. They're worried about being aced out for scholarships and other issues. So I actually think this is just a huge win for the Republican side this time.
All right. Hey, I just want to mention, we'll discuss this more next week, but the a federal judge put a hold on federal employee buyouts. I don't know if any of you know anyone here, whether they're IRS or Hill Air Force Base. There is talk that a lot of people agreed to those buyouts, but a judge put a hold on that. There's questions about whether or not there's funding in place, because we have those really great continuing resolutions where I think we're only funded through March. Is that when we have to play this game again? Yeah. So we'll wait and see what happens next week. But I want to get to the legislative session, and we're going to start on a fun note. Maura bringing the party to
Nothing's more fun than dying.
So you saw a bill. I don't know how I missed this, but Dr. Jen Plum brought Utah's human composting bill to the legislative session. It's not dead yet. It survives. It's moved past committee, I believe. So explain to me what she wants us to be able to do.
Okay, I'm not too deep on this. So,
okay,
so listeners,
we'll stay shallow.
I know.
No 6 feet deep this week.
6 feet. So this first came to my attention, as some people know, I'm originally from Colorado, and they passed this a few years ago. Okay, so the first time you hear about this, you absolutely want to clutch your pearls. I get that part. But like then I warmed up to it, because here's the thing. I think we've separated ourselves from being natural for too long. Like, we are part of the world. We're part of the ecosystem.
We're going to get rid of parabens, phthalates.
Yeah, exactly. So this, like, treats it with respect, but it also acknowledges that we too are organic matter. It gives you the option. I mean, the pitch I heard from Senator Plum was an economic one for the industry of funerals, but it gives you the option. So can you
bury it in your backyard, or how would you be composted?
What do I know? But I think I'm referring to Colorado now. They have designated cemeteries, but there's also this element of having an apple orchard or having something kind of natural about it. So it's still a designation. It still has a process to go through, but it would allow you to be composted. You wouldn't have anything artificial. They're not going to pump you up and put makeup on your embalmed. So, I mean, I get it. It's stressful because it's talking about death, but I think it's a lovely option, one in which I think I would agree to be composted.
I think I might do it too. I don't know if either of you are Ted Lasso fans.
I love Ted
Lasso.
But
I love that show, and there's the funeral episode in there where Keely, who's kind of this fun, crazy girl, talks about how she wanted to be buried under a tree, and then her boyfriend comes in later eating an apple and being like, this is delicious, and she's like, what? And so, I don't know, the possibilities out there. I used to think I wanted to be in a casket, and I wanted like the whole traditional thing, but I've changed my mind over the years, and I'm willing to be I don't know, put in a jar on someone's fireplace or thrown in the ocean.
So why not you with organic materials to aid your composting? But it's like
to break you down quickly.
Yeah, to straw and stuff. I mean, there's some rules involved. It's not free for all.
So you've been a mayor. Could you work this out at like the South Jordan City Cemetery where we could plant some fruit trees, or you have influence still where we could do this?
I think it's a great idea. You know, if you think about it, it's not too far different from burial, right? We're not using a coffin, I presume.
You save yourself $20,000 right there.
Yeah. I personally prefer the traditional cemetery. I do think there's something to be said about visiting the sites and remembering your loved ones.
Right.
I appreciate that.
But what if you could eat our fruit?
Eat our fruit,
Visit us.
Yeah. So if there'd be a way to memorialize
Yeah.
the dead, to have some kind of plaque, I think that could be really nice. Sure.
Yeah.
All right, it's an interesting issue.
Yeah.
If you guys remember this is like different than humans, but I think it was probably about 20 years ago. I'd built a house in the far west end of South Jordan, and I was sort of close to where the landfill was, and you could smell stuff sometimes. You're like, what is that? So I investigated as a reporter and called, and they were using human waste to compost and then making it into fertilizers for gardens. And I thought, well, this is an interesting life cycle thing. So I did a story about it. I decided to put it on my own garden. My garden grew better that year than any year. And people were like, what's your secret? But I didn't want to like,
Yeah, what did you
it's
say?
sewage.
Yeah.
And I was giving vegetables away like crazy that year because I just didn't want to eat them, but they were beautiful.
Didn't you have a bad veggie year last year?
Yes,
So maybe it's
nothing
time
grew.
again.
I know.
Maybe
so
they don't do it.
they don't do it
that?
anymore. So I don't know if something happened
It's a
with
hard
it.
PR sell. I get
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah, so anyhow, human sewage, if you ever get desperate, grows a great garden. Just don't tell your friends and
Good to
neighbors.
know.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get on to some other serious business before we're buried anywhere here. House Bill 81 is the fluoride bill. This is something that came up nationally, I think largely because of the MAHA movement with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's been talked about in a lot of municipalities. I know it was debated when I lived in Florida. Some cities have it, some don't. But the idea is, do we keep it or do we kill it? Because I think everyone knows the basics that it's great for your teeth. We actually have a dentist with us here, so yay, thanks for being here. So when you hear about this as a dentist and then as a lawmaker side of you, do you see two different sides to it, or are you cut and dried and saying keep it or kill it?
Oh, no, I definitely see two sides on this one, especially after all we went through with COVID and medical freedom. I will say, I was a dental student in the year 2000 to 2004. I think Utah, we added fluoride to our water in the year 2000. And so I remember being a little disappointed as a dentist. I wasn't going to make as much money doing cavities. But I don't know that it's had as huge of an effect in Utah as we expected. The pediatric dentists are still really busy. The general dentists are still really busy. And so the fluoride, I do believe it helps. It's been proven scientifically to strengthen teeth. Hydroxyapatite is this constituent mineral of our bones and our teeth. And when you add fluoride to it, it becomes chlorapatite, which is more resistant to bacteria and acid. And so we do know that fluoride works. I hope that if this does pass, it gets replaced with something else. We need to have something to get into some of these inner cities and to educate parents and children that when their teeth are forming and the enamel's forming, the presence of fluoride can produce a stronger enamel. And so I do regret that we're going to lose some of that. But I absolutely understand the tension between medical freedom and this idea that fluoride in the water could help a few people.
Did the state track at all when it started fluoridating water to look at any difference between what we were seeing before and after, if the fluoride was making a difference?
I'd have to ask a public health expert on that, but I anecdotally didn't see much of a difference.
Interesting. Before we move to Maura, one last question. Obviously, we know that fluoride is good for the teeth, but when you look on the National Institute of Health, there's several studies on there that show too much fluoride can be bad for you. And obviously, we're drinking a lot of water, we bathe in it, we shower, we put it on our gardens, so it's everywhere. Is there too much of a good thing, and it may be great for your teeth, but bad for other things? Some people say it's bad for your thyroid. Too much of it can make you sick. Is that an issue that we should be thinking about?
I think it's worth considering. They do say that it's more important for developing teeth. And so that's where maybe the targeted application of fluoride to children in tablet form. I remember my mother gave us tablets.
Pink tablets, I remember.
Pink tablets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did everyone have pink tablets? We were all doing it?
I don't know. I mean, like
Yeah.
when I go into my dentist, the first thing they always say is, "Oh, where did you grow up?" And I said, "Why?" And they're like, "Because of your teeth." But I remember
Because you have good teeth or bad teeth?
Because I don't have cavities.
Oh,
but
mine
I
are
think
trash.
it's more complicated than that. I got that part, but I was like, so I think, and I didn't grow up in Utah, but I remember being given pink tablets in school. And so I think that's how I got my fluoride when in Colorado. I don't think we drank it. I will say, on behalf of my water guys, it's complicated for water purveyors to include that. And so what I agree with Dave, what I wish were a part of the discussion is how we're getting it. Like, let's still keep it a priority and maybe even an appropriation to make sure that grade schoolers have access to fluoride tablets. If their parents want any, you can go through a parental process and stuff. But I do think what I hear from dentists is there's some pretty good evidence when you're growing to add fluoride in. And so I wish it wasn't, I think the concerns
If you
about
could just
water
stop drinking
and the
water after
concerns
elementary.
about the water's everywhere,
Yeah.
right? And all
Yeah.
that, but I'm like, okay, that's the delivery system. Can we still prioritize fluoride and look at the delivery system being changed?
And there is talk about, concurrent with this bill, making fluoride available over the counter for parents, so it doesn't require subscription or prescription.
Oh, yeah. So you just go in and then I can load my kids up on the pink
Go
tablets?
into your pharmacy, go into your Harmon's,
Yeah.
grocery store.
I like the idea of that, and obviously there's going to be some parents where education would be an issue or whatnot, but it just seems to me that just medicating everyone just because is probably not great public health policy at some point too, so.
Although I will say, correct me if I'm wrong, but when fluoride gets to a bad level, like you're dialing that bad boy up. Like it is not a casual hydration.
That
issue.
happened
I
in
think
the
it's-
south part of the valley, didn't it, last year in
Yeah.
one Sandy?
City had
Yeah.
a mistake where they pumped it up too much.
Exactly.
And that's
I was going to
kind of
say
scary.
Sandy, but I didn't want to say the wrong cities and throw them under the bus.
I will say I use a lot of water on my lawn in the summertime, and my lawn has not gotten a single cavity. So
Oh, it's doing great.
So it's fine.
I know, and I'm sure there's a lot goes into diet and all that because my teeth are terrible, and I grew up eating those pink pills. Where we lived in Florida, where my kids were younger, we didn't have it, and then here in Utah they did, and neither of my kids have any cavities. They all are into adult world without cavities. So,
And
Yeah.
we should finish this with obligatorily saying, remember, flossing is more important. I
Yes.
feel like on your behalf, I would like to put that online.
that is absolutely true. Brushing and flossing
That's
is
so weird to
much
me.
more powerful than this fluoride topic.
my dentist is always like, if you're going to choose one or the other, and I'm like, I'm going to do both. He's like, floss, just don't brush your teeth, and I'm like, ew. Who wants to have sweaters on their teeth?
They tell you if you have to choose one, choose floss. Who in their right mind flosses and then walks away, right? So it's a twofer. If you can get me
Yeah.
to floss, I'm just getting that, the rest of that gunk.
Yeah, floss your teeth, kids. All the cool kids. Speaking of health right now, House Bill 288 is Health Care Malpractice Amendments. The general description of this bill is the bill addresses statutes of limitation for health care malpractice. I'm going to start on you again because you've got a little bit of knowledge on this bill. Tell me what it would do and what it would change.
Yeah, so I wear a couple of hats right now. I'm a general dentist, but I also run a dental malpractice insurance company. And so we deal with a lot of incoming lawsuits. Current state law is that a patient would have 2 years after discovery, so they could have had medical malpractice years ago, but the minute they discover that they believe their physician or dentist or doctor made a mistake, they can file a lawsuit against that physician. And so 2 years is quite a bit of time, and I would argue that if you don't know you have a problem for 2 years, that's 2 Christmases, 2 birthdays, 2 anniversaries, you haven't discovered the problem yet, there probably isn't a problem. And so I think that's a wise statute that should remain in place. The second thing this bill would do, so it would change the 2 years from 4 years, just to make that clear. The second thing the bill would do is increase the non-economic damages, pain and suffering, from $450,000 to $950,000. And this was actually part of this discussion of tort reform. And I don't know if either of you remember, but President Trump in his first administration introduced legislation that would have actually pushed that number down to $250,000. And we're not talking about economic damages. So if a doctor causes you economic suffering, in other words, if he makes your medical bills rack up, all of that's still fair game, and that could be millions and millions of dollars. What we're talking about are the non-economic damages, which really don't have a strong basis in law. They're really just a gut check by the juries. And so if you get a very sympathetic jury, there's nothing to stop them from giving $2 million, $3 million, $4 million in non-economic damages, pain and suffering, which would eventually just cause all of our health insurance premiums to go way up.
So you're against this bill? You think it gives too much time?
Yeah, I'd actually like to see it go in the other direction. I think we definitely need to hold doctors accountable. We definitely need to pay for economic damages, but those non-economics need to be reined in.
So I'm going to take the other side. I don't know. I mean, I'll just tell you what I hear on the other side. One, absolutely right. It takes it to 4 years. It does limit. This will speak for what Dave said. Probably it makes his case too. It does limit 8 years total. So after 8 years, if by the 9th Christmas you decide that the problem's too acute, it's too late for you. So you have now 4 years, but you have no more than 8 years to file this. These are all civil, right? So that's where the gut check comes in, is that these aren't criminal. What they would argue is that the amounts have not moved for 15 years. They've not kept up with inflation. They're agnostic to what a dollar buys you now, and that uniquely in MedMal versus other ones like property, those have had increases. This particular kind of suit has stayed stagnant. So they're saying, hey, listen, the amount being raised is an inflationary adjustment over the past 15 years in which it's been held capped at a certain level. So the argument against that is to say, well, it hasn't been moved for 15 years, so it needs to have an adjustment to it. And that one would argue then that it was pro-patient. Now, this is where everyone hates American healthcare. Pro-patient means more risk sometimes for the doctor, and if the judgment comes to the doctor, and I'm going to use this intentionally, the doctor is often forced into raising their rates, because their rates go up. So it's this giant circle of an unknown corporation who's making the money. It's not the doctor is not making more. The doctor now has to carry more malpractice insurance. The patient and the doctor seem to be the ones trapped in the cycle of payment. So I understand that's the frustration when you're talking doctor and we're never talking insurance and we're never talking the abyss that is that fixed part of the insurance. But the argument against what Dave said would be that this is just an inflationary adjustment. That's the disposition of the increase, and that also to equalize it 4 years is what every other civil lawsuit has. So it would say this portion of the statute would now become in alignment with other civil suits. So they would frame it as an alignment issue.
Yeah, and I think I can accept some compensation, but I guess I don't understand if the medical bills are paid for and compensation, even bills against their time lost from work, for example. Those are all economic damages that have no cap. What we're talking about is non-economic damages, which means that if you're lucky enough to have a doctor make a mistake on you, you could become a millionaire. And I just don't know why the taxpayers and everyone that's paying into insurance and paying into healthcare should be giving this lottery system to patients who are fortunate enough. Well, I shouldn't say fortunate.
I'm like, this is a weird way to look at this.
Yeah, I'm being a little facetious. There's a song by They Might Be Giants called South Carolina, and it talks about someone who's hit by a car on his bicycle. And he's talking about now he's got this really great life, and he says, if I had to do it all again, I would actually be hit by that bicycle, or be hit on that day on that bicycle, because if we make these non-economic damages so high, it's like winning the lottery. You become a millionaire because you get these non-economic damages.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at both sides of that. I like the 4 years for someone like me because I like to complain about something and act like I'm dying for a couple of years, and then I need a couple more years to think if I'm serious about it. So then it gives me some time to realize if I'm really dying or not. So interesting.
Well, if you look across the spectrum of all the states and the way they handle this, you'll find it's the more blue states that have higher damages, and the red states have lower damages, and they also have higher healthcare costs in those blue states. Look at New York State sometime.
Yeah, because we want accountability, but we also want doctors, dentists, and people to be able to provide that care because it's getting exponentially more expensive, and so we all take a part in that. So, interesting idea. Do we know where that's headed on the Hill? Has anyone seen the latest?
Yeah, right now we're going to know its fate politically this afternoon. It's being brokered today. It's got a lot of fors and a lot against. It is a heavily bartered bill. Both sides have lobbyists. Both sides are represented. The carrier the bill sponsors experienced. I believe that politically we will know the fate of this bill this afternoon.
All right, we'll be paying attention to that. One bill we know the fate of already is HB 267, which we talked about last week. There was a substitution in there. But this is the Utah bill that ends collective bargaining for public workers. It passed in its newest form. It is headed to the governor. I haven't heard if he's indicated whether he's thumbs up or thumbs down on this. Maura, there were a lot of people at the Capitol, so there was a lot of interest in this. We saw a lot of teachers. We saw a lot of firefighters, police officers there pushing hard against this, but they lost on this one.
Yeah, this is a bad bill looking for a problem. And the governor, it's not veto proof. It had a small enough margin. The governor rightly and smartly said, I'm going to look at it. He is going to give himself a moment to figure out what his position is. But this essentially takes away collective bargaining. But what matters in this is we're an at-will work state. We don't have a strong union system. So those who take you to the extreme of what union horrors, we don't have those in place anyway. Our regulatory environment does not allow for a big union. So what does it mean when you union bust in this way? There are two main things that people can't do now. They can't collectively lobby to increase their pay, and they can't collectively lobby to improve their work conditions. And when the state of Utah, when legislators tell groups of citizens that they can't collectively tell you that they want to improve their work environment, and that they can't collectively tell you they should earn more. Now remember, we're also a minimum wage state at $7.25 an hour. So like, why on earth would the legislature, there's no intellectual genuineness in my mind when you say, no, I'm afraid of a group of citizens getting together and wanting to improve their work environment. We're an at-will work state. We have safeguards on big union propaganda and things like that. This just takes away those two things. You can't ask for a raise with your friends at work, and you can't improve your work environment. I think it's incredibly punitive. We've seen over the last 10 years an aggressive, more and more of an attitude from the state legislature. You see this with cities and towns as well. The legislature knows everything. They should be the final arbiter. They tell you they're taking away the middleman. It's not true. They just want control. So I think it's a bad
Does it
thing.
help anyone though? Let's say you're the superstars teacher and you know there's some other teachers mailing it in. Can you go in there now and negotiate for something better because you're giving a better work product?
It doesn't, our union laws didn't preclude that. And that's actually not how we give out salaries. There's not an administrator alive who's like, one for you, two for you. You can't administrate large public systems that way. You have to have rank and order on them anyway. So you're already within ranges anyway. The legislature's gonna say, well, so there's Samaritans because it was my tax dollars, but we gave the teachers the biggest raise ever. Well, no, they didn't. I mean, that was in part through collective advocacy of the issue of underpaid teachers. So again, if we weren't an at-will work state, if we didn't have safeguards in place, I would maybe take a more moderate position. But I think this is nothing but a pretty shallow power grab, and the legislature is once again ticked at the UEA, and police and fire are going to get really shellacked in this, particularly law enforcement. They've had to work on their unions. I say married to a non-union admin in law enforcement, right? I mean, who rank and file beat up are the chiefs, and you need that balance between administrators and elected officials who have to look at every single department and put a balance in there, and these fierce advocates who are doing public service, and the offering of public service is sometimes not that you always are in it for the pay. So you need the ability to have a collective voice advocating for your work environment. I think this was a power grab.
What do you think? Should the governor veto this one or sign it when it comes to his desk?
Well, I'm pretty torn on this one, to be honest, because I've known a lot of people in public safety. I will say, as far as the public safety piece is concerned, I can't speak as well to the teachers, but in the Salt Lake County, we were constantly competing with other cities to keep officers. And so the free market of pay amongst public safety has been working, at least in the years I've watched things in South Jordan City as well as Salt Lake County. And so it does also put a little chill down my spine to think of all of the public safety folks banding together, potentially, not showing up to work? Are we going to have our police officers not showing up to work if the deal isn't reached? And so there's some issues with that. We've seen that with air traffic controllers as well on the federal level, where they try to do some kind of strike, and it can really disrupt the public. So there needs to be a balance there. I wish I'd followed that bill closer.
All right. Another one right now that I think is kind of looking at some problems we could have dealt with in the November election that weren't House Bill 312 is Carrie Ann Lisbon's bill. I can't talk today. Jail Must Not Release bill. That's the name of it. So Salt Lake County Jail, she says, is releasing 4,000 inmates per year due to overcrowding, not because they should be released. That's about 10 people per day. We're the only county in Utah where the overcrowd release from our jail. She's saying this isn't okay. We need to make some changes to that. Before the podcast, we had a pre-podcast chat, and we were talking about how there was an opportunity to maybe help this on the ballot, but I think people were confused. So, Maura, is this something that we need to be looking at, or is this just part of law enforcement and sometimes it's going to be too crowded and we're going to have to let a few people go?
So this is actually a larger issue of jail reimbursement. Lisenby is speaking specifically to Salt Lake County and the relationship between Salt Lake County. It's the largest jail in the state. But it is not directed at Salt Lake County. It's directed at every one of the 29 independently elected sheriffs. So to be clear, and the reason that's important is part of the compromise the sheriffs have put on the table is, hey, listen, you can think of our jails as satellite locations, and you can move them around. So here's what we know about Utah. We don't currently have enough jails. Salt Lake County has been very clear and acute about what they're going through, and so I think that's part of why Lisenby is directing this at Salt Lake County. But we don't have enough jail beds in general, and here's who's competing for the jail beds, not the criminals. Criminals are competing, but
they're working hard, putting in EOT.
So you have, and jails are not prisons. Like, it's really, jails are not prisons, and there are conditions around the kind of inmate you have. So one of the problems that Utah's having with ICE is because ICE has more bureaucracy than anyone can imagine, and short of handing them a bottle of Evian, you can't house them. So jails sometimes say no to ICE, not because we're sanctuary states, but because they're like, we don't qualify for the 1,200 pages that we would qualify to put this person, and remember, it's a civil detainee. So that's not in play right now. What's in play is Department of Corrections wants to rent a jail bed from a county. And also who wants to rent jail beds from counties are marshals. And marshals and counties have really good relationships. And marshals are paying well for those beds. 2 years ago, this is a chronic problem. This has been going on for years and years and years. So part of the challenge is we're only scratching the surface with the complications. But it's about how you get reimbursed and by whom for the beds that you provide to these partner agencies. 2 years ago, they finally came up with this formula. This bill actually is adjusting formulas. So it is about crowding, but it's more about how you reimburse an independently elected county sheriff for this. And the focal point is Salt Lake City, because Salt Lake City is Salt Lake County is by far and away the biggest jail facility. I mean, like, it's just multiple times bigger. It's just so much bigger. So legislature's given everybody a haircut this year, right? Everybody's getting a haircut. Part of what they want to do is cut this jail reimbursement. But the jail reimbursement, when you're a jail that's saying, we already don't have enough beds, we already are having troubles, and oh, by the way, when you talk about who you serve, if I say it that way, criminals, so Rosie Rivera in Salt Lake County gets forced by the state now to take the state's inmates, DOC, I will say the sheriffs and the Department of Corrections.
So we're talking prison inmates?
No, we're talking jail.
Okay.
So yes, and in some instances now it would come from the Department of Corrections. And if this bill passes in some of its current form, Salt Lake County would have to take those. They would be forced to take those. And then what happens when they have no more beds and someone else gets arrested that should be going into a county jail? And who are you going to get mad at? And let's say now they're forcing civil detainees through ICE. And you're making a decision of, and then you hear that Salt Lake County released all these folks. I mean, just think about the confusing layers now.
Yeah.
And in part, it's because they want to cut jail reimbursements. A big factor is, we were talking about this before, and Dave would know more, but in part it's because we as Salt Lake County residents said no to a jail bond that would have actually put on level the number of jail beds needed. Because again, when we say we're at a jail, we're not like producing criminals. We just don't build jails that much. So it's not like any...
Because it's not a fun way to spend money. It's like putting gas in your car. It's not like a fun steak dinner or whatever.
And recidivism and criminality and drug, like none of those are on the top of our that sounds fun list. I mean, that is totally... So the point being, it's complicated. They're brokering a deal right now, but the part I really dislike, again, my theme, is that they're really putting all the onus, and they being the state of Utah, onus and pressure on the counties again. And the counties are the ones that are going to take the black eye when they don't have enough beds and when they can't comply. Also, they're giving away money. The federal inmates would have brought more revenue into county sheriffs than these departments.
So what do? Do we rent out Airbnbs for these jail inmates? What do we do with all of them, and how do we fix the problem?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed. I'm a big fan of Carrie Ann. I think she's a great legislator.
And she's done a lot on this topic.
She's done a lot on this topic. This, to me, feels a little bit like a strong arm. Maybe it's like a President Trump move where it'll start to get in the conversation rolling. It was very unfortunate that bond failed, the $500 million bond. I supported that. It was actually a bipartisan bond, and we placed that on the ballot. And I was kind of laughing to myself because the same ballot result was that ZAP was approved, but the jail was denied. And I thought, oh, so ZAP is Zoo, Arts, and Parks. So Utahns are okay with jailing animals, but not jailing criminals.
Well, we're thinking, well, that's a fun thing to do with my family. What am I going to get from the jail?
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend a night there. Although a few moms might like a night in jail where they don't have to cook and just lay there.
We're a fun-loving people. That's one of the great things about living in Utah. There's lots of recreations, lots of fun. But this is a sober topic. I suspect Salt Lake County is going to just have to raise taxes and build a bigger jail and do it without the bond, which is unfortunate because the bond would have come at a lower interest rate. And so we're going to have to build more beds for the jail. And I've actually toured the jail with Chief Dumont, is the name of the gentleman that runs the Salt Lake County Jail. And he told me that 10% of those that they book are undocumented. And so what that tells me is if we can get a handle on this border, we might start to see the jail turn around, at least in that 10% range.
So on average, he says there's 10% there?
They just can't find papers, they can't find documentation on 10% of those that they book.
Interesting. It is an interesting problem. When you toured there, did it look like they had the possibility to put more beds in there, or are they really at capacity? Because I remember when I was touring with my kids for college dorms, I went to the University of Utah, and they have these tiny dorms that were built for 2 bunk beds, and then all of a sudden there was 4 in there. I'm like, 4 people are going to live in this tiny closet. So is there room, if they wanted to, that they could put more beds in there, or are they really just at capacity?
It's looking really full. Oxbow is one area that people, it's the second jail, and it's one area that people have said could take some of the overflow. However, its security and its systems are out of date. And so I'm afraid we are at about that breaking point now.
And those aren't just Band-Aids, right? I mean, like, it still doesn't shift. I mean, we have grown. We have more people. And hopefully it'll be too late, but I would love to see Salt Lake County take another go at a bond in 26 for this, because public bonding is the way to finance this. I mean, it would be the least amount of tax dollars that we could spend on
They just need to sell it to people and help them understand what it is.
A little bit of educational campaign would help.
Which will be interesting. All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that. I know I've heard people saying, hey, if there's empty beds or whatever, send them to St. George or send them to someplace else. But you have to remember that they have to get to their actual courthouse that's nearby, and you can't be putting people on 3-hour bus rides back and forth between that happening. HB 300, the voter ID bill, we talked a little bit about this last week, but I pulled up some numbers looking at it because it seems like a lot of people are talking about this online and what the right answer and what the right direction is for the state. And the Sutherland Institute did a poll at the end of the 2024 election. They released it January 15th, so it's been about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they said 74% of Utah voters prefer to have the person overseeing elections be elected by voters rather than appointed by elections. That's for another bill that's being run right now. Good information for whether or not the lieutenant governor should be in charge or if there should be someone appointed. And then 87% of Utah voters say they're confident the ballots in Utah are counted accurately, while 69% are confident the ballots in the United States as a whole are counted accurately, which says to me that people have a large amount of trust in what we're doing here in Utah. They believe they're doing a good job, but maybe not doing as well in other states right now. Dave, when you look at these 2 different bills that we have going on of overseeing elections, of whether the lieutenant governor should be in charge, if we should appoint someone, if we need to be showing ID when we vote, are we headed in the right direction, or are we asking the wrong questions right now?
I like the ID. You think about everything that requires ID. You have required ID to go to the driver's license bureau and pick up a driver's license. You're required ID to even go into Costco. You think about all of the things to travel. Why do we treat voting so casually that we don't require ID? So I do like that. I have heard anecdotal reports of people taking the vote by mail ballots, and they filled them out for relatives and loved ones. And then they've even signed a name. And by the way, I've sat through audits of signature verifications, and I'm really glad that they're doing those. However, the verifiers, the folks that are volunteering, they are I think they're biased towards letting the ballot through, because if the ballot doesn't go through, it requires that the county clerk's staff contact the voter and ask them, did you really vote, and is this really how you voted? And it's a lot of clerical work. And so I saw members looking at a signature and saying, gosh, that looks like an A, doesn't it? Yeah, that looks like an A. And I was looking at it going, that doesn't look anything like that person's signature that we have on file. And yet they were kind of biased towards advancing those through. And so the vote by mail, I think it's good, but to add this extra step of ID, I think would help a lot of us have more confidence in our elections.
So you don't get confidence ratings of 87% in anything else the government does. Utahns have confidence. We've had a tremendous track record. We've had 3 audits on the 2024 election process, and none of them have had statistical variabilities that aren't with just in big process. We'll never get perfection in big processes. And so they are secure. Should we continue to look at that? Yes, we should. But the problem is that, well, what has worked so well in Utah and what we know works for mail-in voting the way we're doing it now is that women particularly vote more because they have a harder time with their schedules, particularly if you're a stay-at-home mom, the elderly, people with mobility issues. We should make it easy in America to vote. It needs to be safe, but easy should be as important as safe is. It shouldn't be really hard. I mean, it is your birthright. It is what differentiates you. It's where our pride comes from, is being part of the voting system. So we should make it as safe as possible. The way that this bill is written in the House is no more than voter suppression. And we do have to show ID in here. The question is, do you have to show it when you drop it off? And if you have to show it when you drop off your ballot, you've gotten rid of vote by mail. So vote by mail in Utah is working. We also know that technology works. There are many other alternatives in which we could verify via ID electronically that the state has said no to. So we could have our cake and eat it too. We could keep vote by mail open for just about everybody. There's also a statistic going around that's incorrect. I mean, everything I've seen of an exit result, 2/3 of us vote by mail in some fashion. About 1/3 of us walk into the ballot. I mean, that's what it's been for the last decade.
I'm a Dropbox kind of girl.
Yeah, and so I think they're not being as creative as they need to. They're not prioritizing vote by mail. This is in fact just part of the far right, and I say far right not to be mean-spirited, but I don't think it's mainstream Republicans who believe that there's something corruptive. 87% of Utahns say we think this is a good system. So why are we doing this bill? My hope is that there's some more clever bills and some more in-tune bills in the Senate, and I'm hoping this House bill gets amended or, hopefully gutted, but I never get my Christmas wishes. But I do hope that this bill gets a little smarter. This is not broken. We are a banner for the rest of the United States, and I'm so frustrated by the fact that politics is driving this decision, not data.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I know it would get rid of mail-in voting. I'm not advocating for or against this, but I do think that you probably would still get better voter turnout if you mailed people ballots, because when they're sitting on your counter, you have time to go over them because sometimes the ballots are long. I think it would definitely up the chances of people voting because it's sitting in front of their face, but the dropping off part is the question.
And if you love county and municipal elections, which I do, you have to vote. We all forget. We remember 4-year presidential elections just because of all the
you can't hide
there. But the amount of really good engaged citizens who sort of just spaced any given Tuesday on a municipal election, but when it's mailed to you, you're like, oh, that's right, I have this right in front of me. That's going on. And that engagement should be as important as the safety. Not more, but as important as safety.
All right. I still think my idea last week might be good, where we scan the QR code on your driver's license and then you do it on your ballot too. And then, it uploads into an app or something.
QR codes?
Well, your ballot would come with its own. I don't know how that would work. That'd be a printing problem, wouldn't it? But I was scanning my driver's license for something today, and on the back, they already have the QR code because it just scans in your information. And I'm like, so it's half there. So we just need someone smarter than myself to figure that out so we don't have to go drop off our ballots, I guess. One final one that I thought was settled business, daylight saving. Everyone loves to fight about this and what we should do. And I think it was in 2020 they actually passed something in the legislature, but it would take an act of Congress or a dozen states on the West Coast to join us. So they're going about this again, and the idea is if the Utah House passes the bill, it would force us to standard time permanently. That means we'd be with Arizona and Hawaii doing the same thing, unless that is the federal law allows us to switch to daylight time, and the whole federal government made the switch. Strong opinions which way we should go? Either of you, or are we like?
I'm all for this. I think it's overdue. We need to. It'd be nice to get to daylight. However, I will say, have either of you noticed that in the summertime around July, you go, it's 10 o'clock and the sun's just setting now?
Oh my gosh, I love that because I work late at night, and so I luxuriate in that. But you would say you'd be okay with the sun setting a little earlier so you could get the kids in bed. And
I mean, the permanence for me is the higher priority, and that's what I'm hearing from people is they'd rather not switch, twice a year. But then we could debate about whether to go to standard or daylight. I think this bill would only allow us to go to standard.
Yeah, because it would match up to what Hawaii and Arizona are doing. But opposite if it's what the federal government decides to do altogether. Maura, we've debated this for years and years, and people, every time we get every 6 months, are like, oh my gosh, can we please stop this? So is this the year to make it happen, or is this just another we're voting and it doesn't really matter because nothing's going to change?
I don't know. You know what? I'm so embarrassing agnostic about this.
You are, wow.
I want to have I want a feeling about this. So I'm easily persuaded. I'm like, I'm for what Dave's for. I've never been bothered by it.
You're not a jet lagger?
I'm not, no. And I don't here nor there, which maybe just speaks to an erratic schedule anyway. I don't know. It's never been that big of a deal. So I want to care. I support those who care. But I'm kind of like, meh, whatever. It doesn't matter to me.
You're fine with the switching?
I'm fine with the switching. I like Arizona and Hawaii, so I would be team Arizona and Hawaii.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be an interesting one about what your opinion is about daylight versus standard. But I'm just really meh about this whole thing. It makes me feel bad about myself. But
I'm a terrible sleeper, so I'm all for changing it. And I'm not even sure which one I would like better, too. But I work extremes where I work from 2 to 11 p.m. and I've worked the 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. shift, and I'm terrible at sleeping anyways. And so switching always to me is like a week of banging my head in the wall. So
okay,
I would love it. Yeah. See, you're like, if we can make Heidi less grouchy. And I know they say that there's a lot of accidents that go up every time you switch, and problems.
Heart attacks happen when we do something.
It's stressful if you're late to work or something, but you think about the original intent was to save energy. And I think they've studied it long enough to realize that it isn't saving energy anymore because of our air conditioners we use and just different factors.
We'll do what we want and use AI till all hours of the dawn. So I think the energy we're using is probably not really saving anyone anything at this point. Dave, thanks so much for being with us. Is there anything you're keeping an eye on as we head towards the legislative session, or you're like, oh, this Trump is so fun, I can't wait to see what happens there? Is there anything you're looking forward to right now?
No, this is just, I think it's a great time. I'm interested to see how things unfold.
All right. It's kind of a fun show to watch right now. If you're a popcorn eater and you just want to watch the country and see what happens.
Show.
Well, when things change.
The best reality TV show.
And are you loving it or hating it?
I am 100% totally burying my head in West Wing and hoping that Jed Bartlett gets elected again. That's where I am. I'm not living in reality right now.
I love political shows and I've never watched that. Is it time that I do it?
It's time.
Okay.
I mean, it's a little lefty, but everything works out at the end of every episode. What's not to like?
That is nice when they can solve all the world's problems and they're like, guys, no nuclear war. It's all done and we're good to go to bed. Okay, I love that idea. Thank you, both of you, for coming here and taking part in the conversation. Thanks for listening, and we will be back again next week.
Well, that was fun.